Today in Final Fantasy, we get the coolest turtle ever, a card that just might make equipment decks actually playable in Standard, a spicy new Spellslinger commander, and so much more. Let's break it down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron, and it's time for another daily dose of Final Fantasy spoilers. So we're nearing the end of week 2 of spoiler season, but we get some super sweet cards to talk about today, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking sweet new Final Fantasy cards. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. First, if you need any of these cards, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Second, to keep up on all the latest previews throughout the day, you should head on over to mtgpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk some Final Fantasy. First up today, we get a super sweet green mythic in Ancient Adamantiose. So it's a 8 mana, 8/20 turtle. It's a green card. It has Vigilance in Ward 3. It has a unique ability. Damage isn't removed from this creature during cleanup steps. So essentially, if damage is dealt to this, it sticks around from turn to turn to turn until it eventually adds up to lethal, maybe. And then all damage will be dealt to you and other permanents you control is dealt to this creature instead. And then when it dies, you exile it and create 10 tap treasure tokens. So Ancient Adamantiose, if you can get this on the battlefield, the next 20 damage that's dealt to you or your other things is going to go to it. Once that damage stacks up, even across multiple turns, it ends up dying, going to exile, you get 10 treasure tokens. And this card has some really cool shenanigans. So if you're looking for comparisons, the closest is probably Imperial Archangel. Imperial Archangel did something similar. Any damage dealt to you would be dealt to it instead. The problem is it only had 8 toughness, so your opponent didn't have to deal that much damage to you, although it is worth mentioning, the damage on Imperial Archangel didn't stick around, so your opponent had to deal 8 damage in one turn. The twist here with Ancient Adamantiose, you get way more toughness, but the damage sticks around, so your opponent can deal 5 one turn, 6 the next turn. If it eventually adds up to 20, then your Ancient Adamantiose is going to die. It's kind of like it's wearing a Pariah, an enchantment that makes all damage dealt to you, going to the enchanted creature instead, and then once it dies, the 10 tap treasures kind of remind me of There and Back Again, or if you get a Smog and a Smog dies, you get 14 treasure tokens. It is a ridiculous amount of mana. So what do we actually do with this card? So the easy answer is you just try to ramp into it. If you ramp into this with Overlord of the Hauntwoods and Lumbering World Wagons and such, you get this down as long as it sticks. It's essentially a gain 20 at a minimum, right? Like you leave this out, your opponent has to attack you and deal a bunch of damage or damage your other stuff until they eventually get rid of the Ancient Adamantiose, and then they can go on to kill you. So it's going to buy you a ton of time if you ramp into it. The problem is it can't just die to a removal spell. The Ward 3 does help, but this card is 8 mana, so by the time you get on the battlefield, your opponent can probably spend 5 to go for the Throated or whatever, so that's worth keeping in mind. It's not hexproof by any means, although the Ward is a nice upside there to help keep it on the battlefield. Probably the best trick with this card, though, is this might be the new best Parination target in all of Standard, or at least it's very close to Herald of Eternal Dawn. So Herald of Eternal Dawn just makes it so you literally can't lose a game and your opponent can't win the game. Ancient Adamantiose kind of does the same thing. You could still lose to Milling Out or some win the game effect, or like Blood Artist Rain, which isn't technically damage, it's loss of life. But in most situations, if you can get a hexproof and indestructible Ancient Adamantiose on the battlefield, you pretty much can't lose the game until your opponent finds a way to deal with your hexproof and indestructible turtle. It's also got some sweet shenanigans with cards that can put it back into play from the graveyard when it dies. So like, not that after all. You give a creature, the next time it dies this turn, you return to the battlefield with a Wicked Roll on it. Sephi Eric's Daughter can do the same thing. You sack it, and the next time it dies, it comes back into play. Loyal Retainers can kind of do the same thing. So the trick here is, let's say you have an Ancient Adamantiose, and it's about to die. You're not dead after all. When it goes to the graveyard, you're essentially going to get 2 triggers. So the death trigger, the exile and create 10 tap treasure tokens, it's not a replacement effect. So it's going to put a trigger on this deck. Your Ancient Adamantiose goes to the graveyard. There's going to be a trigger that says exile this. Then there's also going to be a trigger from Not Dead After All that says return this to play. If you stack those triggers properly, you'll get your Ancient Adamantiose back into play before it goes to exile. And then the treasure creation, the make 10 tap treasures, is not dependent on the card going to exile. It doesn't say when it goes to exile you make the treasures. It just says exile it and create those treasures. So my understanding of how this works is you'll still get the treasure tokens, which is kind of ridiculous. So if you let your ancient Adamantiose sit out and soak up a bunch of damage and then save it this way when it goes to die, you're gonna get a fresh Adamantiose that doesn't have any damage on it, and you're gonna get treasure tokens, which is kind of insane. The thing I want to do most with this card though, and this is not gonna be a good plan, but it's gonna be a funny plan, is build a turtle deck with it in standard. I've been trying to make an Ambling Stormshell, Fecund Greenshell, Bedrock Tortoise deck work ever since we got Ambling Stormshell. It hasn't quite gotten there yet, but Ancient Adamantiose might be the card that makes this plan work. It's another turtle to untrap our Stormshell. It can keep us alive against aggro if we get it down fast enough. It triggers Fecund Greenshell. If we have Bedrock Tortoise, so our stuff deals damage equal to its toughness rather than its power, it's technically a 20/20, which is a one-shot kill. So I'm not saying turtles are going to be good in standard, but I am saying I'm definitely going to build a turtle deck around this card in standard. Once you get back to Commander, there are endless shenanigans for this card. So there's a few different ways that you can kind of build around its effect to keep it going for a long time. So for example, the problem with Ancient Adamantiose is eventually the damage stacks up because the damage isn't removed on cleanup steps. So eventually it's going to stick around, the damage is going to add up. Once it gets to 20, it's going to die. But there's some ways around this. So like regeneration, for example, the next time a creature is destroyed, you remove all damage from it and it comes back into play tap. So if your Ancient Adamantiose is finally getting so much damage it's going to go to the graveyard, you can just regenerate it, it'll start over, it's 0 damage, the process repeats itself. It's hilarious with Vigor. Vigor says if damage would be dealt to a creature you control other than Vigor, you prevent that damage and put that many +1/+1 counters on it. So all the damage that's dealt to you is going to go to Ancient Adamantiose, but all the damage to Adamantiose is going to be prevented, and instead you get a ton of +1/+1 counters. It's kind of hilarious with Catechus Staff of Hermes, one of the cards from the Assassin's Creed set. It says as long as you have 30 or more life, equipped creature gets +5/+5 and has indestructible and prevent all damage that would be dealt to this creature. So as long as your life total is at 30, you put this on each Adamantiose, and essentially you can never take damage, it can never take damage, and it's massive, and it's life linking. Also, Sandskin works that prevent all combat damage will be dealt to and dealt by enchanted creature. Another way that all the damage is dealt to you goes to the turtle, but that damage is prevented. Maybe the simplest way to reset it is just blink it, like let it sit out for a couple turns. Once it gets 15 damage on it and you're getting close to enough that it's gonna die, if you just ephemera it and blink it, it starts over at 0 damage. Plus you can also just make it indestructible and it can soak up all the damage that you want and it's never gonna die. So there's so many shenanigans for this card. As far as where you can play this card, in some sense it's a fun card to just play in any green deck, but I think it's probably at its best in toughness matters commanders like Dorn of the Siege Tower. When this is an 8 mana 20/20 rather than an 8 mana 8/10, it becomes a legit scary card. Or like Pride of the Hulklatch, you even get some turtle synergies there. But like I said before, the card's just so fun and so unique. If you're playing some sort of big mana green deck where you're just ramping into big creatures, I would probably play it just for fun. I don't know if it's optimal necessarily, but there's so many cool shenanigans for this card, and it's just such a sweet design. If I'm playing like Galta or Kona or Omnath, I'm probably just going to throw it in there just because I really like this card. Also, one thing I wanted to mention that didn't work, because this is a weird quirk of the rules. I saw some people talking about, all right, what you do with this card is you play it in like Merkle Lord of Modes or Shelob Child of Ungulant. These are commanders that when a creature dies, you get them back in non-creature form. Like Merkle, for example, when a non-token creature you control dies, you exile it and you get a token that's a copy of it, except it's an enchantment and loses all of their card types. Shelob, when a creature dealt damage by a spider you control dies, you get a food token copy of it. So you would think intuitively, okay, if I have Merkle and my Ancient Adamantiose dies, I will get this enchantment that can never die from damage and will soak up all the damage that's dealt to me forever. But there's actually an obscure rule in Magic that says if one of these damage prevention effects turns into something else, so your creature that prevents damage turns into an enchantment, that effect stops working. So as far as I understand the rules, these synergies don't actually work. Just worth keeping in mind because it seems like they should work, but actually there's a rule that keeps that from working. So Ancient Adamantiose might be one of my favorite cards in the set. It is super mythic feeling. It's just so big and flashy. It's like exactly what I want out of mythics. I don't think it's actually going to be like super competitive, but so many of the shenanigans with this card just seem so incredibly fun. I'm definitely building around it in standard, and I think we'll see it in a decent amount of commander decks. It's just a super cool design. We also got A new Is It Spellslinger card. Of course, it wouldn't be a Magic set, even a Universes Beyond set, without getting yet another Is It Spellslinger commander. So this is Tellah Great Sage, a 5-mana 3/3 human wizard. It's a legend, of course. It says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 colorless hero creature token. If 4 more mana was spent to cast that spell, you draw 2 cards, and if 8 or more mana was spent to cast that spell, sacrifice Tellah, and it deals that much damage to each opponent. So Tellah, if you can cast some big spells with this, it's actually kind of sweet. So you cast cheap spells, you get a young Pyromancer essentially for 5 mana. Every time you cast a cheap non-creature spell, you're getting a 1/1 token. Once you get up to 4 more mana being cast on the spells, you get the token plus a divination, which is actually pretty powerful if you can keep chaining together these big spells. It is worth mentioning, you can't cheat on the cost here. We've seen like Up the Beanstalk be super powerful because even though it refers to 5 mana value cards, there's a lot of cards that are technically more than 5 mana, but you can cast them for 1 mana like Leyline Binding. Tellah specifically cares about how much mana was spent on the card, so you can't really cheat on it. Like, if you cast a Leyline Binding for 1 mana, you're only getting the 1/1 colorless hero token. You're not getting the divination out of that. But anyway, cheap spells give you a young Pyromancer, more expensive spells a divination, and then if you cast a really expensive spell, and I don't know if this is actually worth it because you gotta sack Tellah, but you get like the ultimate mode of Alchemist Talent, a bunch of damage going at your opponents, which I guess if you're closing out the game is sweet. Probably the easiest shenanigan with that is just make a ridiculous amount of mana and cast some big X spell that's actually such a high mana value you just kill everyone at once. Basically requires infinite mana to get there, or close to infinite mana, but it would be pretty sweet. As far as standard is concerned, this card's just not playable. Not even a little bit close to playable. It's in the right colors for like Corey Steelcutter Is It Prowess, but at 5 mana, it's a 3/3, and then you need to cast spells for it to do anything. This is not designed to be a standard card. I would be surprised if even Wizards thought this was going to be a standard card. What this is a really interesting Spellslinger commander. So on one hand, we have infinite Spellslinger commanders. Like I said before, we get one of these seemingly every set. Some of the most popular, Mizzix of the Ismagus, Stella Lee, V-Ran. We got Vivi or Tanir, which is the most popular new legend from the Final Fantasy set so far. So tell us just another card in this mix where you play an Izzet deck, you cast a bunch of spells, you get value out of your commander. The twist with Tellah is it really encourages you to play bigger spells. I think especially spells that are mana value like 4 up to 7. Once you get to 8, it gets a little questionable, like we said, because do you want to sack your Tellah? I'm not exactly sure. But that's kind of the twist, because a lot of Spellslinger commanders just want you to chain together as many cheap spells as possible. I do like that Tellah is a little bit unique in that it wants you to cast bigger spells, and I think where this is going to be at its best is actually as an X spell commander. I think X spells are the easiest trick to break Tellah. So we have some commanders that specifically refer to X spells, like Roshin, Zaraxa. Hinata doesn't refer to X spells, but tends to be used with X spells. But the trick with X spells is you can cast them for whatever mana value you want. So if you have enough mana, you can cast it for 20 mana, sack your Tellah, deal 20 damage to the table, maybe win the game on the spot. But you can also cast them for 5 mana and get the divination mode in the wizard mode. So it works really, really well with X spells. So I think that's the direction I would go building around Tellah, rather than trying to get like all the mana values of your spells, right? Just play a bunch of X spells and you can make them whatever mana value you want to power up Tellah in the situation that you're in. So Tellah, not a standard card by any stretch, and it is a little awkward that it's in the same set as Vivi, and Vivi is just such a popular Spellslinger style card, but I do think people will play this card. It does have some unique twists with the big spell thing. I expect it's going to rank behind Vivi as far as Spellslinger commanders from the set, but I do think we'll see it in Commander on occasion. We also got Vaan Freedom Seeker, a new red legend. So a 3-mana 2/2 legendary human scout. It says whenever one or more scouts, pirates, and or rogues you control deal combat damage to a player, exile the top card of that player's library. You may cast it. If you don't, you make a treasure token. And then when you cast a spell you don't own, put a +1/+1 counter on each scout, pirate, and rogue you control. So Vaan, it's kind of a party style card. I don't know if you remember the party mechanic where you wanted these different creature types. I think that Vaan's kind of the same thing. Actually, you know what I think this card really was? Is Wizards wanted to make a scout commander, but there's not enough mono red scouts, so they added the extra creature types to maybe make it kind of playable. If you want to look for a comparison, kind of reminds me of like Robber of the Rich, Ragavan. The twist here, obviously, is Vaan works with other scouts, pirates, and rogues. So in your ideal world, what you want to do is get down creatures of the right type type early in the game. Marauding Mako, because it's a shark. Spyglass Siren, because it's a pirate. Maybe Kellen, because it's a scout, or Tiny Bones, or Charming Scoundrel. Play those early in the game, then you play Vaan. You immediately attack with your pirates or whatever. Start drawing cards from your opponent's deck. Maybe you get to cast them. Worst case, you get a treasure token. And if you cast a spell, you start putting counters on everything. So in a deck filled with cheap creatures of the proper types, I think that Vaan can actually be kind of powerful. I do think this is probably more of a commander thing, though, than a standard thing. The issue I see in standard is twofold. So first off, we got a couple of really good red 3-drops that just have better stats and abilities than Vaan. If you look at the red 3-drops that see a lot of play right now, Screaming Nemesis, Tersa Light Shatter, they're both 3/3s, they both have haste. I guess Van's ability kind of gives it haste if you have other creatures on the battlefield in a weird sense, but I think that as far as competitive decks go, I imagine that in like mono red or whatever, you're probably going to see Tersa in Screaming Nemesis over Vaan. The other problem with Vaan is it's only a 2/2. Yes, once you start casting your opponent's spells, you can start growing it, but the turn you play it, it dies to Cut Down, it dies to Burst Lightning. These are really popular effects in Standard, so I don't think this is really a competitive Standard card, although it does seem fun to build the deck we were talking about with like a bunch of creatures of the right type and just see if Vaan can power the deck. As far as Commander is concerned, I think this is actually a pretty fun build around, so I would play this as my Commander and just overload on creatures of the right type. You can play Ragavans and Breaches. Scouts are pretty weak. Alana, I guess, maybe Crimson Cavalier are the best scouts that you could play in the deck. There are a few good red rogues. Rogues are really a demure color, but there's a few that are pretty decent. So there's definitely enough creatures, if you go into all 3 types, that you can just play a deck where all your creatures are these types. And the trick in Commander is, if you read its ability closely, whenever one or more scouts, pirates, and or rogues deal combat damage to a player, you exile the top card of that player's library. So in Standard, at best, you're only stealing 1 card a turn. In Commander, though, if you hit each of your opponents, you can be stealing 3 cards a turn. If you cast them all, you're going to get 3 counters on all your stuff, or you make a bunch of treasure tokens. So it is a really powerful effect. I mean, we talk about in Commander, the most powerful thing you can do is card advantage and mana advantage. Card advantage and mana advantage. And Vaan, in its own weird way, kind of does both. The treasures give you mana advantage. You steal cards off your opponent's deck, which give you card advantage. So it is an inherently powerful effect. The other way you can build around Vaan, and you're still going to want all these creatures of the right types in the deck to make any of this work, but it also works really well with just cards that let you play your opponent's stuff, like Triple Triad, exiling from everyone's deck, maybe letting you cast those cards from free. Ensnared by the Mara, lets you steal cards from your opponent's deck. There's a bunch of cards that do this. Apple of Eden from the Assassin's Creed set. So I think those are the kind of cards you can play to back up all of your scouts and pirates and rogues, because as you're casting your opponent's cards, your team gets really big. It makes it easier to keep attacking, to get more cards with Vaan. So I actually really like this card as a Commander. In Standard, I'm not really seeing it. It's just too small and probably too slow, and it cares about creature types that aren't especially good in Standard. But in Commander, it seems like a super fun mono red build around. We also got an uncommon that might be my favorite card from the entire set, and that is Stolen Uniform. And I think this card is a really big deal for Standard, even for Modern. So Stolen Uniform has some of the worst wording I've ever seen on a card for what should be a very simple effect. 1 mana instant. It's a blue card. It says... And we're just going to read this verbatim, and then I'll tell you what it actually does. Choose target creature you control and target equipment. Gain control of that equipment until end of turn. Attach it to the chosen creature. When you lose control of that equipment this turn, if it's attached to a creature you control, unattach it. So what this card wants to do is for 1 mana, you can take one of your equipments and put them on one of your creatures at instant speed. You cheat on the equip cost, the equipment stays there forever. You can also use this on one of your opponent's equipment. If you use it on your opponent's equipment, it attaches to your creature, but only for 1 turn, and then it's going to be unattached and end up going back to your opponent at the end of turn. So Stolen Uniform, the stealing your opponent's equipment, that's just like a funny, weird thing you can do in Commander. The real power of this card is it's a magnetic theft. Magnetic theft, 1 red mana, attach an equipment to target creature. That's the simple, clean wording. I know they want you to be able to steal your opponent's stuff, which led to the really weird wording, but that's the power of this card. We don't have many effects that do this. We have magnetic theft in red that was printed 20 years ago. We have resolute strike in white, but it only works with warriors, which is a pretty big downside. So just 1 blue mana, put an equipment on a creature. That's an effect that could have a very big purpose in Standard. We've seen these effects be really good with equipment like Colossus Hammer, which is cheap to cast, but really expensive to equip. If you go back to the earliest Hammer Time decks, Magnetic Theft was actually a key part of those decks. It's eventually kind of the decks evolved, and it doesn't really see play anymore, mostly because the deck isn't in red anymore. It's an Azorius deck now, which actually means Stolen Uniform is kind of a big deal for Modern since it works in the Hammer Time deck, but we'll get to that in a minute. As far as Standard is concerned, this is the card that could actually let some of these high equip cost equipment actually do something, like Ultima Weapon, a Terran Preorwid, Mechanist Arsenal. These are just equipment that they do powerful things, right? We talked about yesterday, a Terran Preorwid, maybe adding more power to the battlefield than any equipment ever. Even Ultima Weapon, +7/+7, when it attacks, you get to blow up one of your opponent's creatures. That's very powerful. So those cards are really good. The problem is, you can't really afford to spend 6 or 7 mana to cast them, and then 5 or 7 mana to equip them. Like, Ultima Weapon is 14 total mana to get on a creature. A Terran Purewin is 11 total mana. That's just way too expensive for Standard. But if you have Stolen Uniform, yes, you still have to pay the high cost to get them on the battlefield, or find a way to cheat them into play, but then you just cheat on the equip cost altogether. For example, with Ultima Weapon, Stolen Uniform is essentially making 6 mana. It only does it for a very specific thing, but think about Dark Ritual. One of the most broken cards in Magic's history is just 1 mana to make 3 mana. In the context of Ultima Weapon being put on a creature, this is essentially 1 mana to make 7 mana, which is ridiculous. The other thing you can do with this card, so discounting the cheating high equip stuff onto your creatures, the other plan is you can use this at instant speed to get your equipment that have combat damage triggers onto an unblocked creature. So you swing with your team, wait to see how your opponent blocks, and then 1 mana Stolen Uniform, put Buster Sword on an unblocked creature, or Sword of Forging Frontier on an unblocked creature, so you get its powerful combat damage triggers. You could also just kill your opponent this way with like Leyline Axe or something, giving a creature double strike that your opponent's not expecting to win the game on the spot. So that's the other thing you can do with this card. This card also, and I can't believe I'm saying this because my experience with the Ether Spark in Standard has been, it is just a really bad Standard card, but I think that maybe Stolen Uniform could give Ether Spark a chance. So the problem with Ether Spark is you have to play it, and then you have to spend the first turn that you play it, plus wanting it to equip it to a creature, which means you can't draw cards, you can't make 10 mana, but if you have Stolen Uniform with Ether Spark, you can Ether Spark, use Stolen Uniform to equip it, so you don't have to use a loyalty ability, and then you attack with the creature that you put it on, get a ton of loyalty, maybe make 10 mana right away, or draw cards right away, which actually seems kind of busted. I could imagine some sort of weird combo deck where your goal is just like Ether Spark on a big enough creature to make 10 mana and use that to like flood the board or combo off and win the game. So it might actually make Ether Spark good. What I want to do with this card, and this is a horrible against the odds plan, but I really love the idea of Cotis, the Fangkeeper, the 4 mana 2/1 indestructible creature. Then when it deals combat damage to a player, you exile that many cards from the top of their library, and you can cast any number of spells with mana value X or less from among them without paying its mana cost. Essentially a villainous wealth to your opponent, equal to its combat damage. The problem with Cotis is it's only a 2/2, so stealing the top 2 cards and casting things mana value 2 or less just not very impactful. But if you can make Cotis really big, a single hit from it can generate a ridiculous amount of value. So I want to try to use Stolen Uniform to get a Terran Purewin on a Cotis at a high enough life total where we're going to be stealing like 10 cards from our opponent's deck or something. Is it a good plan? Probably not, but it sounds super fun when it works. The other place that I think this card will see play, and this might be a stretch, but I think it can show up in Modern Hammer Time. So we talked before about how Magnetic Theft used to be in Hammer Time, but then Hammer Time moved away from red and into blue. And right now, if you look at Hammer Time lists, Sigarda's Aid is the default way to cheat equipment onto your creatures in the best way. But the deck is playing Battlefield Improvisation, a card from Assassin's Creed, which is a 2 mana instant that gives a creature +2/+2. And if the creature's attacking, you can attach any number of equipment you control to it. I think that Stolen Uniform is probably just better. Yes, you don't get +2/+2, but you also don't have the attacking restriction. Yes, it only attaches 1 equipment, but really, you mostly only want to attach Colossus Hammer anyway, so I don't think attaching multiple equipment's a huge upside. So I think that Stolen Uniform is probably just an upgrade to Battlefield Improvisation in Modern. It also could open up for a Hammer Time deck in Pioneer. In Pioneer, we do have Sigarda's Aid, but as far as instant speed equipping, it's basically Resolute Strike, and with Resolute Strike, if you're a warrior deck, can be okay, but a lot of the creatures you want to play in the deck are not warriors. The biggest problem I see in Pioneer is in Pioneer, the default colors for Hammer Time currently are red and white. So we'd have to kind of rebuild to get into blue, but I think that Stolen Uniform might be powerful enough to actually make it worth it. This just leads to some really fast kills when it works. As far as Commander is concerned, that's actually where I'm least excited for this card. If you look at similar cards, Magnetic Theft, Fumble is probably the closest one in blue. 2 mana, return a creature to its owner's hand, gain control of all ores and equipment that were attached to it, then attach them to another creature, which you could use that on one of your own creatures. It's a little awkward, but these cards just really don't see that much play. Although, if you're playing some sort of equipment deck, like Anara Kennerid, or Captain America, or Tetsu, I think it's fine. Like, being able to put your equipment on a creature's fine. I guess it's super cute with Captain America since you can re-equip the stuff that you take off to deal damage. But, yeah, I don't know. We haven't seen similar effects be that popular in Commander. In Commander, people want things that are a little more resilient, I think, a little more value generating. So we'll have to wait and see. It's fine in some sort of an equipment deck, but I don't think it's really a staple in any Commander deck. But in 60 card formats, this card is a legit big deal. Super hyped for this one in Standard, and excited to see if it can do some cool things in Modern and Pioneer as well. We also got one more Final Fantasy Through the Ages card in Adeleine Resplendent Cathars, Hero of Light. Adeleine, not an especially expensive card, but it is a pretty powerful card. People play it in Commander decks. It was very good in Standard before it rotated, so a card that you can get some use out of at least. As far as lower rarity cards, we got a couple of cool Saga shenanigan cards. Clash of the Econs, 1 green mana, sorcery, choose one or more, have a creature fight a creature an opponent controls, remove a lore counter from a Saga you control, or put a lore counter on a Saga you control. And then Garnet is a 2 mana 2/2 legendary human noble cleric that has lifelink, and when it attacks, you can remove a lore counter from each of any number of Sagas you control, and put a +1/+1 counter on it for each lore counter removed this way. So these cards, I think they're mostly going to be limited cards, but maybe we can build a cool Saga deck around them in Standard. Being able to remove lore counters from Sagas is actually pretty powerful because it keeps your Sagas going for longer and lets you reuse their best abilities. And we're entering a Standard, thanks to Final Fantasy, where you have all of these Saga creatures that look pretty powerful. So we'll have to wait and see if there's like a legit Saga deck in Standard, but if there are, I can see these cards being efficient enough to serve a purpose in those decks. Even just being able to keep your Saga creatures alive for another turn is really powerful, because a lot of those Saga creatures, they're really undercosted because Wizard knows you only get 1 turn of attacking with most of them, and then they're going to sacrifice themselves. So I felt safe to push a lot of power into those cards because they're temporary, but cards like Clash and Garnet can help you keep them on the battlefield longer, which might actually lead to a cool Standard deck. We also got the rest of the common town cycle. We've seen cycles like this many times before. Just make 2 mana, enter tap. The twist here is they're towns, which we still haven't seen any constructed worthy payoffs for building a town deck, but in Limited, it might be possible to build a deck that actually actively cares about towns. Finally, we get some draft chaff that you can check out over at MTGPreviews.com. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Final Fantasy spoilers for today. So what do you think of today's cards? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back tomorrow with even more Final Fantasy spoilers. So until then, have an amazing day, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? Well, check out yesterday's Against the Odds, where we did some Throne of the God Pharaohing in Standard. And of course, you can find our last spoiler video right here.